From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The House of Representatives breaks the logjam on aid to America's allies on the weekend and passes separate bills to help Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine with large bipartisan majorities. The Senate is expected to pass the House legislation on Tuesday, and President Biden will sign it. What have we learned about the debate over the aid bills, and will Speaker Mike Johnson lose his job because of it? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal opinion pages here on our Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder Odell, who have been following the long saga, which is finally over. And it reminds me of the old line, often attributed to Winston Churchill, but perhaps probably apocryphal, that you can count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all of the other alternatives. But this strikes me as important a vote, given where we are in the world, as Lend-Lease was to aid to Britain under President FDR when Hitler was on the march in Europe. The real question was, would the U.S. abandon its allies? And credit to Mike Johnson, the Speaker, who risked his speakership to push the bills to the floor, and credit to Democrats for helping to overcome the faction in the Republican Party and the Rules Committee and on the House floor who tried to block it. Kim, it's interesting to me that the majorities were so large in favor of the bills, albeit with shifting coalitions for each bill. But how did Johnson do it?
How did he do it, Paul? Well, he decided that he was going to face down these small minority of Republicans that had been using different procedural tools at their hands to block this vote for months and months. And what he did in the end, if you look at these bills, the Ukraine bill passed with 71% of the House. And by the way, that was the most controversial of these. But then you look, and the TikTok bill, the bill that bans TikToks, also imposed some sanctions on Iran and allows America to try to take some of the assets of Russia. It passed with 83%. The Israel bill passed with 84%, and the Taiwan bill passed with 89%. So you might ask yourself, why have we not done this in the last few months? The administration actually asked for this money back in October, and it's because there were Republicans opposed to this that were using positions that they had managed to grab as part of that speaker fight with Kevin McCarthy on the Rules Committee and on the floor when it came to passing a rule. So the other thing that changed here is Democrats who wanted to see this happen because the White House wanted to see it happen, decided that they were going to help Republicans, helped move it through the Rules Committee, helped get a rule onto the floor. This was vastly important, and I agree with you. They also get credit. But fundamentally, this comes down to courage, because hanging over Johnson's head all along has been Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican who is promising to use this other tool, the motion to vacate, and kill his job. And she decided to hold back for now. We can talk about the dynamics of that. I think she was actually being very strategic in doing that. He gets a lot of credit for making this happen. And I would just note that those numbers in the end show that this was the will of the House, okay? And yes, we do have certain protections in both the Senate and the House for minorities so that they don't get totally ramrodded, et cetera. But this was a small group of people that had managed to gain some extraordinary power that's never been in existence before for a minority of that size, and were abusing it. And Johnson decided to end that game, and Democrats helped him.
Let's listen to Senator Lindsey Graham comment on the vote in the House.
If you pull the plug on Ukraine because you don't have enough capability, there goes Taiwan. The Ukrainians are fighting like tigers. This aid package has a loan component to it. This would not have passed without Donald Trump. I want to thank the House Speaker and Hakeem Jeffries working together in a bipartisan fashion to give weapons to Ukraine to fight a fight that matters to us. And President Trump has created a loan component to this package that gives us leverage down the road. So this idea that we can't help Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan at the same time, I reject that. I reject it totally.
Kate, I think that probably gives a little too much credit to Donald Trump, since he created some of the opposition to the Ukraine aid in the first place. Although more recently he has been more circumspect, and he did come up with the loan idea, which is probably a gimmick because everybody knows that loan is going to be forgiven at some point, given the deep hole that Ukraine is in financially. I mean, I just want to elaborate a bit on the one point Kim made. I'll see what your point of view is here on the size of the anti-Ukraine coalition, because it was 112 Republicans voted against aid to Ukraine and 101 in favor, but offered a chance to vote on a specific amendment by Marjorie Taylor Greene to strip Ukraine aid from the bill. She only got 71 Republican votes. So it strikes me that the difference between that 71 and 112 vote on the final bill probably includes a lot of Republicans who are just trying to protect themselves from a primary challenge.
So I think the politics of Ukraine in the Republican conference are, as you know, a little more complex than they appear. You do have 71 Republicans who supported that Marjorie Greene amendment to strip all Ukraine funding from the bill, but you came quite close to getting half of the conference, 101 versus 112, only a handful of votes short there of getting half the conference on the bill. I think it was helpful that Trump this time decided to say nothing about the bill. He, of course, killed the border deal earlier this year because he wants the border issue through the election. But he seemed to be muted here and be happy getting the loan idea, which should mute some criticism. For instance, this is about the money that we give the Ukrainian economy for financial assistance. That's the money that will be packaged in a loan. So there was some success here in getting Trump not to wade into the package and kill it. And I think that's because Trump understands that a weak Ukraine that's on the verge of losing is not the kind of world he wants to inherit if he wins in November. But I think also, some of these Republicans don't want a primary challenger. Like you said, the southern border issue has become so toxic and Republicans can't get anything on that front through the House. I think that is why you had some members who really should know better and are not philosophically opposed to supporting Ukraine end up voting against the final bill. But I do think the most notable development here is that the Speaker of the House made arguments in favor of supporting Ukraine that were in the tradition of Ronald Reagan, in that you don't hear a lot these days that freedom is a good thing that America should support for our friends when possible, when they're fighting our enemies who want to take over their country. So you had here, I think, a show from Republicans like Mike Johnson that I think showed that there really is a fundamental Reaganite impulse in the party that still is the majority of the party, even if you've had some of these scrambled politics. And one example of that, we just listened to Lindsey Graham. I'm glad he's back in the fight. He voted down Ukraine funding as part of the border deal to express his displeasure with the border collapse and unable to do anything. So you do have Republicans here on both sides of the issue. But I think this is a good sign for the party that you still have 101 Republicans after all that supporting it.
All right. Freshman senator once asked Bob Dole on the floor how he should vote. And Dole's answer was, well, you can never go wrong voting for a bill that fails or against a bill that passes. And that might explain some of these Republican votes. All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, more on the politics of foreign policy in the Congress and Mike Johnson's future. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder-Odell here on Potomac Watch. Kate, just want to follow up here quickly on how will this aid affect the battlefield in Ukraine? It's going to make a huge difference when it gets there, no doubt. But give us a couple examples of how.
Well, one of the biggest problems Ukraine is having as they are struggling to hold their defensive lines is that they're running out of interceptors for their air defenses and having to ration those interceptors both at the front lines and protecting some of their civilian infrastructure. So you had an attack a couple of weeks ago where the Ukrainians took down missiles that Russians were shooting at a power plant, and they were able to take down the first 7, but then the last 4 missiles were able to elude air defenses and destroy the power plant. So that's a microcosm of the problem Ukraine is having every day. And you also have really acute ammunition shortages, particularly 155 artillery. I use these 2 examples because they are places where the United States should have a lot of this stuff pre-positioned in Europe, could flow in very quickly now that the Senate's going to move on the bill and the president's going to sign it. So those are 2 examples where you could make a difference quite quickly. And that would be very helpful. Morale in the Ukrainian military is really suffering, which makes sense if you are sent to a front line and you have to decide when to shoot back based on not running out of ammunition for the day. The other quick example I give is that I don't think it gets enough attention in this bill, but Republicans included a provision in their bill that requires the Biden administration to transfer long-range missiles known as ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System. These missiles could make a huge difference in helping Ukraine strike deep into Russian positions or on strategic targets in Crimea. And the Biden administration spent a year and a half refusing to give them the missiles, then gave them a few. This is another example where Republicans could say, we are making the president stronger. We're insisting that he not only help Ukraine, but that he help them win. And that is a place where if the Republicans succeed in forcing the Biden administration to get a real number of those missiles into Ukrainian hands, you could start to see the battlefield in picture improve for Ukraine.
And Kim, just coda here on some of these votes. The Democrats, 37 of them voted against aid for Israel in protest to the war in Gaza, and only 21 Republicans voted against that. One of the interesting facts about these votes is there were 14 Republicans in the House who voted against all 4 of the bills, which means they don't want to give aid to anyone who is American allies. These are the pure isolationists. They didn't even vote for separating TikTok from Chinese ownership, which is striking. Another 17 voted for Israel aid, but against Ukraine aid and Taiwan, which again is kind of crazy strategic logic. I mean, the good news here is I think the isolationist faction in the House is smaller than advertised.
Yes. A couple of notes to make on that particular faction. One, as you say, these folks actually are a very, very tiny minority of the 435 members of the House. So I think that that's a good thing. The other thing to note on these guys is that if you look at them, almost all of them are in crazy safe GOP districts. And so that often gives members license to engage that way. These folks right now are listening to, if you look at polls, there's a certain percentage of uber conservatives, primary voters, Republican voters who really are implacably opposed to foreign aid. They are entirely in the America First camp. We can't give any money overseas while we have any issue that we need to deal with here at home. The kind of, I call them that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time caucus. But that's who they're listening to. There's a couple of them that might have a few primaries from the Republican side that maybe should make them a little nervous about this vote. But overall, yes, good news that this is not a broader faction. It's certainly not as big and loud as the microphone somehow suggests.